Earlier, when we wanted to loop over a list and capture the index value of each item in this list, we did something that looks like this, where we used the range function along with the length function to basically create an array of numbers that ranges from 0 all the way through the length of the items. And with that, we ensure that this item or this I was the value or was the index of this array. Now, this is very error prone because what if I did pass in the wrong list name here, or I passed in the hard-coded value? If any value generated by this range function is actually out of bound for my list, that will throw out a runtime error. The preferred method that we would use for something like this is to use the enumerate built-in function. Now, before we actually make any adjustments to this function here, let's talk about what enumerate does. Over here, I'm going to create a new list. Let's call it names. And if I call print enumerate what names are, it will iterate over this list. And for each item in there, it will create a tuple that contains the index as the first item in that tuple and the value in the second. So it will look something like this. Oh, we're not able to print it. Let's see if I try to print it itself. What would that look like still? Okay, so in that case, I'm gonna need to cast it into a list just so I'm able to see what it looks like. All right, so here we go. We have a list because that's what I cast it to. Of course, I can also pass it into a tuple, but each item here is basically a tuple that contains the index as the first item and the name as the second item. Now, what that means is that if I take this function over here and I update this such that it's not a range and a length, instead it's an enumerate function. So what that means is that this I now is no longer just the index, it's actually a tuple that contains both the index and the value. So over here, what I'm gonna need to do is unpack that into two variables, the I and the value. I can be explicit about it and call this the index and the value. In that case, over here, my items at index I is gonna equal, and here I can, just for the sake of demonstration, I'll update the value of items at the index of I to be whatever the value is plus the exclamation point. Now, we're not demonstrating passing by reference or passing by value, so let's just go ahead and demonstrate what that would look like. So now if I have this list of names and I pass it into add, exclaim, and pass in names, and print out the updated names value, since we're not passing it as a copy, we're passing the original reference to the actual names list. If I print that out, we get John, Jane, and James, all with the exclamation point. But essentially what we're talking about here is what we use the enumerate function for. This ensures that our indexes or our index values is never going to be out of bound because it's generated by the list itself. And because this returns 2 items for each cycle or for each iteration that we're looping over this new list, we are extracting or unpacking the values into 2, one called index and one called value. And from within the loop, we're able to use them.